Hey there, welcome to the LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Matt Duma, an LSAT teacher and tutor at the LSAT Demon, and soon to be graduate of the University of Maryland Law. Woo! Okay. With me is Sara Kamuni, a rising 3L at Harvard Law. Sara, I don't know why I called you Sara. Sara, how are you?
I'm doing good, although being referred to as a rising 3L, I think you're the first person who has said that out loud to me, and that's terrifying, but I appreciate it. I'm sure it's not as scary as you being about to graduate, which really is terrifying.
It feels a little terrifying. Studying for the bar is a whole thing, but I'm sure that studying for your exams is pretty similar. So how was your second year at law school?
It was good. I enjoyed it a lot. I think the last time I did one of these podcasts, I talked a lot about the clinical work I've been doing, and that's really been the defining element of my 2L year, and really just loved every moment of doing that. And yeah, I think like 1L is just such a whirlwind, and you kind of don't even realize what's going on until it's already happened. Whereas 2L, it's like, okay, I kind of know what I'm doing. I don't always know what I'm doing. Definitely don't claim to know what I'm doing, but I feel settled in a good way.
Awesome.
And yeah, learn to figure out what's important and what's not in terms of where to put energy and worrying and things like that. So it's been pretty good. How's your last year at University of Maryland been?
It was also a whirlwind. I did clinic as well during my 2L year, which I thought was phenomenal, and was like, this is like, you get to do real law stuff, which is just so interesting and challenging and fun. And so I took that to maybe the next level. I don't know. We'll see if you follow and do some of this your 3L year too. I externed both the fall and the spring. So I worked for real lawyers in real law offices doing very real stuff. I externed for the Attorney General's Office of Maryland. And then in the spring, I worked for a U.S. District Court judge in chambers, just writing opinions. And it was amazing.
Wow, that's amazing. That's something I don't have any experience of at all, that kind of behind the scenes of what goes on in chambers, and it sounds fascinating. I'm sure you saw all variety of stuff.
Highly recommend. Work for a judge. It will open your eyes. It was amazing, though. Do you have any cool plans for the summer?
This summer, I am going to be at the ACLU of Massachusetts, which I'm really excited about. And then at the end of the summer, my best friend from preschool is going to be getting married. And kind of weird because we were in preschool not that long ago, but it turns out it's been about 30 years. So don't really know how to feel about that. But no, I'm really excited for that, and really excited to be spending the summer doing work that I know is going to be really, really interesting, stuff that I'm really passionate about, but also staying in the Boston area, which was very important to me because I just cannot move. I cannot move anymore.
Amazing. And the ACLU is such a cool, like, awesome organization. I had some friends work for the ACLU of Maryland and had such a great experience. So I anticipate you're going to have such an awesome experience working there this summer.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It was the place that I wanted to go to this summer. So lovely when that pans out. And yeah, I think it'll be something really different. Like, having done clinical work, everything has been direct client services,
Sure.
which I love doing. That's the type of work that brought me to law school. But in terms of impact litigation, that's not something I have as much experience in. So I think it'll be good for me. It'll be really interesting. I think it'll be an opportunity for me to work in issue areas that I haven't really worked in before, because I've pretty much only done immigration stuff, which is, as anyone who's ever heard me on this podcast before, my life's work, the thing I love doing more than anything. But it'll be good for me to broaden my horizons. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And Boston in the summer is also very nice. But is your summer pure bar prep or?
Pure bar prep. Well, that and, teaching for the demon.
Of course.
Always and forever. I am discussing with my wife what our pipe dream of my bar trip is going to be. Because I don't know if you have thought about this yet, but a lot of people, after they take the bar, they're like, I have to de-stress. I'm going to go to the Caribbean and sit on a beach for 2 weeks. And so my wife and I are talking about what we're potentially going to do for that, which I'm excited about, but that's a tomorrow problem.
Oh wow, I actually didn't even know that that was a thing, but now that you've told me that's a thing, I will be looking up Airbnbs in the Caribbean directly after this podcast recording.
I think we're talking about going to Belize because I
Oh,
love
nice.
snorkeling, so I've always
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes. But
No, that's a place that I would love to go. They have, from what I can understand from other people's Instagram posts, there are very nice eco resorts in Belize.
yeah, and those are the kind of things that we're looking at. So we'll see how the summer shapes up. But for right now, it's head down in my books, bar prep all day, every day. Super fun.
Godspeed, my friend. Godspeed.
You'll be there before you know it.
Yeah, that's great. The part I hate. That's what I don't want to even think about the bar. Oh my God. I'm going to be taking the MPRE which I didn't really know about, actually. It's like this professional responsibility ethics exam. For those who haven't heard MPRE before, which was me a couple of months ago. So I'm pretty sure it's nothing like doing bar prep, but it will be weird going to like a testing center and all of those things. And because actually the last time I did that would have been the first time I took the LSAT right before the pandemic. And that's a level of anxiety I don't want to experience again.
So I can reassure you, the MPRE is not too bad. It is I think it's the multi-state professional responsibility exam for the listeners at home. And it's in many states part of the bar admission requirement. Not every state, but many states. And you study for it. You're required during your years in law school to take professional responsibility or legal ethics or whatever your class is called at your particular school that essentially cover the model rules of professional responsibility, which is all the ethics laws and rules and things that the lawyers have to adhere to. You know, things like don't steal your client's money. That's a big one, right?
A classic.
Don't steal your client's money, duties of confidentiality, and you can't represent two parties on both sides of a litigation dispute, like those kind of things. They test you on. It is not too bad. I went to do it just recently and passed just fine. I'm sure you will pass just fine.
I appreciate the vote of confidence. I mean, given the subject matter, if I don't pass just fine, I probably need to reconsider what I'm doing with my life. Because hopefully if they give me a multiple choice about should you commit fraud, I will go to no. That's my hope.
There's some nuance there, though. Things about like whether you actually know versus whether you just strongly suspect, for instance.
Yeah, that's where they get you, I guess. But no, I will. Fingers crossed it'll all go smoothly.
Yeah. Well, I could just sit here and chat with you all day, but Eric sent over an awesome email from a listener that I wanted to get your take on. And so here we go. It says, it's an email from Andrea, and she says, "Hello, Ben and Nathan." I'm like, well, you get Sara and Matt. Congratulations,
Close enough.
Andrea. Close enough. Andrea says, "I'm a former Demon student and got accepted into law school thanks to you guys. When I first got started studying for the LSAT, I never thought it was possible, and you guys made me feel so comfortable and prepared for the LSAT. You guys were such a help throughout the entire admissions process and gave me such hope that my law school dream was possible to achieve. Now that my first year is just around the corner, I am nervous. What should I expect during the first year, and how should I prepare? Andrea." So first, I just want to say congrats to Andrea. Like, Andrea, you did the work, right? Like, Sara and I, all the rest of the people at the Demon, Nathan and Ben would all say, hey, we showed you the door, but you walked through it. You're the one who did the work to get the scores, to get into the school that you were hoping for. So first off, kudos to you, Andrea. Then I wanted to say, Sara, what kind of advice do you have for Andrea? What should she expect during her first year? How should she prepare?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just want to reiterate, huge congratulations to you, Andrea. That's such an exciting time. I know after you've studied for the LSAT for ages, it's like, oh, wait, now I'm actually going to school. Yeah. But like Matt says, you put in the work and you deserve this, and super excited for this next chapter for you. I think in terms of what to expect, I think one thing that you can start preparing for now, and it's not taking a class over the summer or reading a bunch of books or anything like that. It's you're going to be so exhausted during 1L that I can't even put into words. Or I guess I can put into words. There were times in 1L when I was so tired that I could barely string a sentence together. And that for me was quite alarming because I didn't realize that I was going to be that exhausted just mentally by the volume of information that was being thrown at me all the time. And I think something that you can start preparing for now is, how do you take care of yourself? How do you rest? Where can you get rest over the summer, right? Does it mean like scaling down other responsibilities that you have? Does it mean being more mindful about your routine and things like that? These are the types of, it sounds silly, right? Just like take care of yourself. But that's the first thing to just go out of the window during 1L. And
Yep.
everything else, doing the reading, like figuring out the perfect way to outline, like which color highlighter you want to use, like you'll figure that stuff out. But fundamentally, like if you are exhausted, unhealthy, not eating right, not finding time for meaningful movement in your day, not finding time to communicate with the people who are important to you in your life and all of those things, like 1L is going to be way, way harder than it already is, and it's pretty hard. So I think that would be my number one piece of advice, right? Is making sure you take the steps that you can take over the next few months to be as fresh and as feeling the cringe alert best version of yourself as you can be before you get to school. Because like I said, like I remember, Matt, I don't know if you remember this, but I briefly was teaching LG foundations when I first started 1L. And after a couple of months, I had to give it up, not because I didn't love the class, not because I didn't have time to do it, but because I was so tired that I felt like I was standing up in front of the class delirious. Like it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And nothing could have prepared me for that, actually. Not like just the level of exhaustion that 1L puts on you. Not to put anyone off. Like it's great. You should do it if that's what you want to do, but it's another level.
It is hard, and I think people should expect it to be hard. And then if it isn't for you, congratulations. You like maybe you're even more destined to do this. It is a very large volume of information. It's putting your mouth to like the fire hose and trying to absorb all of it. I want to reiterate a bit of what Sara was saying, in that really establishing like good habits towards your health, like your mind, body, like mental well-being, healthiness. You have that time now. Like it's, as we record this, it's at the beginning of May, and you have until August to try your best to establish healthy routines, like eating healthy, getting exercise on a regular basis, and doing those kind of things. And you can establish those and make them habits right here, right now. If you try to establish those kind of habits while you're in law school, they're gone. Like you have the chance to stick them out. And like, I go for a run every day. I'm not saying I do, but like if your habit, I definitely do not. If your habit is I go for a run every day for 20 minutes and you establish that now, you're going to be better off for it through law school. Yes. Are you going to miss some of those times every day? Yes. But you can establish those kind of things now, which will make you happier, healthier, and all those kind of things. What about sort of like what they should expect? Like what should people expect when they actually get to law school? Like they open the doors, they're walking into class. Is there anything that they should expect even before then?
I think there's probably two main buckets that my mind is dividing this question into. There's like the social aspect of law school, right? Like you're going to be with this cohort of people who you've never met before, who are coming from all types of different places and kind of navigating that. And then the other side would be obviously the substance of law school, which is it's a whole other ball game. I think on the social aspect, one thing that really struck me when I got into law school was how everyone was just acting kind of weird. Like nobody really knew how to act around each other because it's such a weird social situation, right? You're just plunged into a room with a bunch of people who are mostly about the same age and are all here for law school. But apart from that, like figuring out who's who, like what's what, all of that stuff. So I think like if that's your experience, right, and it takes a second to establish connections with people, to the extent that you can remind yourself that that's 100% normal and it's not you, and it's not that you're not going to have friends during law school and you're not going to find people who are your people and things like that, that might be reminding yourself of that might take some of the kind of anxiety out of it when you get chucked into this room. I don't know what it's like at the University of Maryland, Matt, but for us, it's just in this room with my section that was 80 people, and we were kind of being put into icebreakers and things like that. But it's still like, sure, you feel like you're just like giving your elevator pitch about yourself like over and over again. And it's hard to figure out like how, I don't know, like, is anyone going to want to sit with me at lunch and that type of stuff? Like, it's very high school and it feels very weird.
Yeah.
But it's completely normal. And I think you have to just accept that that's like part of the process. And by the time finals comes around, like you'll have people who you're, going to right after class to say like, hey, what do you think of that class? And like all of that stuff. And from there, like you're going to form really meaningful friendships that will hopefully be lifelong. Like, wow, I was I was happy with my friendship situation before I went into school, but just the amount of new people I've met who now just mean so much to me. It's like, this was amazing. So that is what I would say for the social part. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think Harvard's a little bit different than University of Maryland. Like every school is a little bit unique, but Harvard's also pretty sizable as far as their classes.
That's true. Very true.
Our sections were only 18. So we were much smaller. But I took my entire first year of classes with those same 18 people. I mean, we had other sections that came as well in some of our bigger classes. Contracts had 2 or 3 sections in it. So we had like 60 people. My criminal law class had like 8 sections in it. It was over 100 people, which was very big for University of Maryland. But I am like very close with many of the people still from my section. They are still my study buddies or still my confidants or still the people that I run about like career advice or help them with their career advice type things. And you do encounter that. And it is kind of weird. I can't speak to going to the classroom either because I started law school on Zoom for the entire first year. And so it was even weirder when we actually did go to the school because we were all used to seeing people from the neck down, or I mean, I should say the neck up only. The rest of your body didn't exist, right? And so we didn't know how tall people were or any of that kind of stuff, which felt strange when we saw people for the first time in person as well. But there is that kind of like, oh, everybody's the new person in high school. Does anyone want to sit with me at the cafeteria table? There is some of that oddness. And I think it's really because everybody in law school comes from such a wide variety of life experiences. Some people have families, some people don't. Some people come straight from undergrad. Some people worked for 15 years beforehand, all of those kind of things and everything in between. There isn't like, oh, I came from middle school to the same high school that like feeds into it. So I kind of know some people and don't know other people. Everybody going there is kind of, oh, I don't really know anyone here, which, okay. That puts everybody on even playing field for that respect too. So. Yeah,
exactly. 100%. Like it just feels weird at first and then you settle into it. And as long as you can remember that it feels weird for everyone and just kind of roll with it and know that eventually you're going to come out the other side with your community. I think that's something helpful to keep in mind. I guess talking about the substance, what to expect, the substance of school, I'm just going to be vulnerable and say that I think you should expect to have more reading than you could ever hope to do, because that was my experience in 1L. I'm sure Matt's going to tell me he read every single word.
I did. I'm that jerk, though.
Good for you, man.
I read everything.
That's your truth, and I respect that. That wasn't my truth. I think it's important with the substance it's easy to get overwhelmed. I think it's important to know your limits. I knew that I wasn't going to be a student that was up reading until, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I knew that it was important to me to get a full night's sleep. I knew that sometimes I was going to be able to get through all the reading. Sometimes it just wasn't going to work out, and that was okay.
Yep.
I think in terms of understanding the stuff, you should expect to, especially at first, feel a little bit out of your depth. Like it's hard to, like right at the beginning, it's hard to see how things are fitting together. It just feels like I love this idea of putting your mouth over the fire hose. I think that's so funny because it's perfect, right? It's like they're just like blasting you with information. And at first it's going to be a struggle to see how the puzzle pieces fit together. You can make use of, if you go to a school and it has an outline bank, for example, like you can make use of those resources to try and kind of get that big picture, but it's not going to come together super clearly at first for most people. And that's okay. And you can, kind of going back to the idea of everyone's kind of in the same boat, like it's definitely not just you. There are going to be people in the classroom who seem like they know exactly what's going on. More than likely, they're just better at hiding that they don't know what's happening. And to the extent that you can, identify people who you can collaborate with on studying and, talk through things that you don't understand, maybe go to office hours together if you feel like kind of nervous about putting yourself out there and going to office hours by yourself, or asking a professor a question during class. Like those are all things you can do to make it a little bit easier, but it's supposed to be hard. And I don't like the traditional law school pedagogy isn't necessarily super conducive to learning all the time.
Right.
And to the extent that you can remember those things and not internalize any of the struggles that you're having as being like a you problem, that for me, I found helpful in terms of like keeping myself moving forward in a productive way. And yeah, like 2 years down the line for I don't want to blow our cover, Matt, but we were just having a conversation about some of the substance that we covered in 1L, and it's funny what you end up remembering. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the substance is a lot. Like it is a lot. I stayed up many nights until 2 or 3 in the morning in order to get the reading done because, I was working while doing it, but like, and I don't recommend that to anyone. But like I was determined to get through the material as best I could. That doesn't mean that I understood it all just because I had read it. It's so much. And like my contracts class, for instance, we were reading 100 pages a week, and that was just for that class. And it's like this super dense, tiny font, like really intense contract stuff from, the 1600s through today, talking about the UCC and everything. But it was dense material, and that's just one of the 5 classes that I had in the fall, and then you do the same thing in the spring. It is a lot. It does get easier over time as you get more familiar. Like I was one of those people. I didn't have any people in my family really that were like lawyers I didn't know what a holding was. I'd never heard that before. Right. And it's like, that's the most important thing that the court says. It's the ruling essentially that they come out with saying this is the law now or going forward or whatever. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know how to brief a case. I didn't know how to do any of that kind of stuff. And you have to kind of learn on the fly what works for you. But to your point, to what Sara said, it may not come together for you right at the top. It may not come together for you by the middle of the semester. But neither of those things matter as long as it comes together for you before your final exam. Some people don't make the click until studying like the reading week or whatever people are calling it, where you're off of classes, but it's before finals. And so it's really your time to kind of process the big picture, to put all the puzzle pieces together. I just had a friend who told me that she just finished evidence, and she's like, it came together to me 2 days before the exam. And I'm like, great, you probably did great. Like, that's all that matters. And very relatable. I was so angry during all of criminal procedure because none of it makes sense morally, a lot of it doesn't make sense as well still, but it
Hmm.
didn't make sense how it all fit together until I was really putting it all together by doing my outline process. So uh,
Yeah.
there's a lot to wade through, and you have to kind of piece it together as you go.
100%. I just had that exact experience with Quip Pro. Like the whole semester, I was like, I don't get it. Like I don't like why did we talk about these things in this order? And then when I was going back through stuff, I was like, oh, that's why we did
Yep.
arrest warrants right there. Got it.
Yep.
But no, I think you make a great point about it doesn't really matter until you start piecing things together for the final. I think you should expect to kind of to that point. I think you should expect to be given a lot of material to prepare for class and then not really encouraged to pay so much attention to what might be on the final. And my suggestion would be to think about the finals way sooner than you think you need to. Because at the end of the day, unless your professor is like grading you based on your responses to cold calls, you don't get
Unlikely.
it.
Very unlikely that is the case.
Very unlikely. Having said that, I have been a victim of that, so I did need to mention it just to
Sure.
know, for people to know that's a possibility, because that was terrifying. Um, but apart from if that happens, like you don't get extra points for nailing a cold call, right? You get extra points on the exam. So
Yeah.
see what your professor is asking for on exams, and try and, if you're struggling to juggle between classes and things like that, try to use that to kind of focus your studying and what's important and what's not important and what you need to be reviewing and all of those things.
Yeah. A really great way to figure those things out. Almost every professor that I had at Maryland, and I imagine that this is probably similar at Harvard, almost every professor had an exam bank of like their
Mm-hmm.
previous exams. It might not be the one from last year, but it might be, a couple of years ago, but they'll have 3 or 4 or 10 or however many. And some of the most consistent advice I got before going to law school, and that I've given out to everyone that I've talked to about going to law school, is do practice exams during your exam prep period. Do a couple of them. Don't just do one and call it a day. Like do 2 or 3, even if you don't do them like fully fleshed out, like you've typed every word, you could just outline. You could issue spot and outline and sort of think through the process. You should do at least one under test circumstances to sort of get that feeling. But those practice exams are such a window into how your professor asks questions, and then the responses are such valuable insight into what the professor is looking for. What's important. Are you supposed to kitchen sink this particular thing? No, this professor's really, really focused. They only care about the most important issue rather than all 10 issues you could bring up. Well, you might establish those kind of patterns by reading the practice exams and then doing that. But you should not do that before law school. That's something that it's like at the end of your semester, once you're like, do not go searching even the first week or the first month. Like that's right before your exam period. Start really diving into those. But you need to think about them maybe about a month before would be my sort of suggestion.
Yes, that makes sense to me, and I think it can be helpful just for, even if you don't, the exam question might cover something that you guys are going to cover in like the last month of class or something like that. As Matt says, it's just so helpful to see like, okay, well, can I expect that the professor's going to ask a bunch of policy questions? Like, should I be really paying attention to the policy discussions that go on in class? Or is it the case that we're having these policy discussions and they're actually not going to come up on the final at all?
Yeah, because
So
it's
I
only
should,
the black letter law, right?
yeah,
Totally
yeah.
been in that boat. Very frustrating.
Yeah, we've all been burned by the by the policy to issue spot and bait and switch. But it's that's the type of thing that you just wouldn't you don't know unless other students tell you. And in most schools, from folks that I know and like my own experience, there are people and students trying to build that institutional knowledge about like this is what this professor is looking for, and this is the type of exam you can expect, and all of those things. But yeah, that's definitely something I didn't know much about at all when I first went in.
Cool. So just to sort of like put a little bit of a button on all of this, I wanted to ask if you had a couple of maybe like rapid fire things to suggest outside of this broader discussion. Like, were there any particular resources that you used that you found helpful? Any particular methodologies you found helpful? Any of that kind of stuff? Books you read that you were like, this was gold? If any kind of suggestions towards that, towards how people could prepare for 1L?
In terms of preparation, not particularly. In terms of kind of methodology while I was in school, I realized in the second semester that, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, Matt, actually. I think the traditional way to study during school, like law school, is it's all about outlines. Like it's all about making an outline and like all of these things, which, yes, there are outline banks and that information is really, really useful. I would also say, like, you've been studying your whole life, right? Like during high school exams, like standardized tests, like all of those things. Don't reinvent the wheel if there's something that you know works really well for you, right? The classes that I've done best in, I made full use of the resources available to me. But when it comes down to, so we do this thing right at the very end of kind of finals prep called kind of making an attack outline. I don't know if that's what you guys call it.
Yep.
And it's basically like bare bones, like this is the stuff that I need to remember to jog my memory while I'm in the exam itself. And I go right back to how I used to study in high school, which is like multicolored mind maps with like felt tip markers. And I don't know what it is, but having that next to me as opposed to like a more traditional looking attack outline that's a Microsoft Word document that's got a checklist and stuff like that, like if there are things you know that work for you, don't push those to one side necessarily. Like find how you can incorporate them into your, obviously this is going to be probably I assume the biggest, academic endeavor that you've ever undertaken. But if the stuff that works for you, find a way to fit that into your studying, because that stuff is tried and tested. Whereas, outlining and like all of these new things that people talk about all the time in law school might not necessarily be the best thing for you. I'd be curious what you think about that, Matt, because I feel like it's not something that I've heard super often that other people have said, but it's definitely something that I've found super helpful.
Yeah, I think like everyone hears the word outline and in law school, and I'm going to briefly explain what an outline is, just so our listeners know. So an outline is kind of like, depending on how you do it and how fancy you make it or beautiful you make it or whatever, it's a collection essentially of like the entirety of the knowledge from that particular course that you've covered over the semester. And you could do that a number of ways. You could make a separate document. You could combine all of your written notes over the course of the semester into one single document, essentially. But what it is, it's like a reference of every case you've covered and sort of like the important points and what your professor thought about it and maybe some rules and whatever. And so it could be like, if you're talking about criminal law and you're talking about murder, you're talking about, okay, there's these different elements and you have to satisfy the mens rea. What is mens rea? Okay, well, it's the thought, sort of like intent behind what you did. Did you have the appropriate intent? And so people do these kind of things in this giant document, and it's essentially like the puzzle. You're putting the puzzle together from all of the different pieces over the course of the semester into one sort of final thing. Then, as Sara was talking about, a lot of people will boil that down into because that could be 150, 200 pages, your big outline, for instance. Then you take like the main points and boil it down to like a 1 or 2 page or 5 page attack outline is what we people called it here too. My sort of response to that is, do what makes sense to you, which I think is exactly what Sara just was saying. Don't throw all the things that have gotten you successfully through life out the window just because you're in law school. If there's something that you know works, great. Like try and see if that is effective on the practice exam. See if it gets you through the practice exam successfully. There are some classes that I did not even outline for, because it didn't make sense to for whatever reason because of the format of the class. I did not outline evidence. It's just a bunch of rules. Okay.
That's
like
super real. I actually made a spreadsheet for evidence. Little
yes.
Google Sheets action for those rules.
Totally. Because like, does anyone care about the case law from evidence? No. Those are just illustrative of the rules themselves. The rules say what they say. It either applies or it doesn't. It's either hearsay and it's an exception or it's not. Yes.
Right. No, unless it's like literally like there's like a couple of big Supreme Court cases and then they get their own little entry on the spreadsheet and it's fine.
Confrontation clause. Perfect example.
Confrontation clause. There we go.
Perfect example. So, yeah, I agree. Like do what makes sense to you. And there's great resources out there like outline banks, which you can use as reference and see if you miss stuff or give you inspiration. But realistically, you should be doing your own thing because you're the one taking the exam. No one else is. Someone else's resource materials isn't going to be helpful for you. And also, it's probably against your school's honor code. A whole other host of can of worms there. But like, at least at Maryland, we weren't allowed to use other people's materials if it was like an open book exam. We had to prepare our own materials, for instance. So
right. But actually, like, most of the learning for me and the synthesizing is going to happen when you make your own materials. Like I can't imagine sitting in an exam and trying to like navigate something that someone else made when kind of like we were talking, like you just don't know how the pieces fit together. Like the best learning comes when you're making those materials for yourself. But I will say
it's the journey, not the end result. Like that's something my professor talked about all the time about the outlining process. The outlining process is the learning process. It's not the document.
Exactly. And I will say it's probably easy to get boiled down in making your resources look as beautiful as possible and all of those things. But honestly, I've been finding that even handwritten notes like just make things stick so much easier for me, and they look horrific, right? So to the extent that you find this. Right. To the extent you find yourself getting distracted, like, oh, I need to make this font and this color and stuff like that. And that's not the important stuff, guys. Like, get back to studying.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So I think we should probably wrap this up. We've given a lot of great information here. I think hopefully we've given some people some things to sort of expect or look towards. I do want to make the comment that a similar topic has been covered. I was fortunate to record episode 161 of the Demon Daily with Michael Hill, where we talked a bit about what sort of things we did to prep for law school, some book recommendations, some other stuff as well. So I wanted to give you the opportunity, Sara. Is there any sort of last thoughts or materials you might recommend before we say goodbye?
Honestly, I can't say that I know there are books out there, like what's it, Getting to Maybe is one that people recommend a lot. Yep. I didn't read any books before I started, I have to say. My school did provide some, they call it 0L, and it was kind of a primer on the court system layout and those types of things. That's helpful to know, I think. Like if your school provides something similar in terms of resources to kind of get you to a baseline of, okay, this is the terminology that we're going to be using. This is what a holding is, for example.
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful to engage with. And I definitely benefited from those like video resources and stuff like that, but definitely didn't pay for any, pre-1L prep courses or anything like that. And yeah, I never got around to reading any of the books that folks recommended, but I have heard that sounds like in episode 161 there are plenty of recommendations, and I have heard many of these recommendations and that they're good.
Yeah. I want to really hammer in on, and I meant to mention it earlier, I took a little bit of a 0L at my class or at my school as well. And it was about 2 weeks, and it was like a pre-contracts, or contracts focused 0L, which was essentially the same thing. We learned how to read a case. We learned how to brief a case. We learned what the holding was and sort of how to parse all of that. It was incredibly valuable. Did not pay for it. Don't pay for pre-law stuff because there's so much free stuff out there. Your school probably has something. And if they don't, go on Coursera. I think Yale has a free 0L that you could take if you are interested in doing that kind of prep work of learning like the basic lingo, learning the basic idea of what law school even is in the first place. And I think that's valuable because then you can hit the ground running a little bit because you're going to be reading stuff before your first week even starts because you're going to get a syllabus 2 weeks out and there's going to be reading assignments for the first week. And so not floundering quite as much even before you start, I think was pretty valuable for me, but I definitely didn't pay for it. Like absolutely no way ever should you pay for that. Don't pay for law school. Also don't pay for law school prep.
No, I fully endorse that statement. There's just no need. And because the information, at least that we received during 0L, you could, with some carefully crafted Google searches, you could get right to what you need to get to. Like, you don't need to pay for it. And hopefully your school will facilitate you obtaining that knowledge through a 0L course or similar.
Awesome. Well, Sara, it has been lovely, lovely, lovely meeting up with you again, catching up with you, finding out what's going on. I just want to say thanks. Good luck at the ACLU this summer. It's going to be awesome. You're going to do such great work. I can't wait to see what you come back and say next time you're on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure. It's lovely catching up and good luck with bar prep. And I hope you have fun on your, what's it called? A bar trip? Bar vacation?
Yeah, bar trip.
There you go.
Bar trip to the bar, right? If you'd like to be on the show, email daily@lsatdemon.com. If you'd like to ask us a question or share some LSAT or law school admissions news. Thanks for listening.